This conversation was sponsored by Dash, an open sourced, decentralized, and privacy centric digital currency with instant transactions. Learn more at dash.org. Hello, we're here at Acapulco 2016. I'm joined by Bob Podolsky, and you have a very interesting story of how you came to do what you do. He is an ethicist, and you were a physicist, an engineer, and a psychologist, right? So you've
Psychotherapist.
psychotherapist. So I would like to hear a little bit about your story, and I'm particularly fascinated by that mix because it seems like psychotherapists are just psychotherapists, physicists are just physicists. So you've kind of attached to the core of how humans and matter works.
Okay. Thank you. I'm really glad to be here. And I grew up believing I was just going to be a physicist because my father was a well-known physicist and I really admired his work. And he taught me a lot of really valuable lessons when I was very young. I understood the cause and effect and the scientific method by the time I was 10. So for a long time, I thought that was what I was going to do. And I took on, in school, especially graduate school, I took on some very challenging projects, had a modicum of success with them. But I also learned, because my father was a university professor, I learned I didn't want to work in that environment. Now, many years later, I realized that universities are all run by cartels, and that turns out to be the reason I didn't like the environment in which I saw my father working. So after 10 years working like Dilbert in a cubicle with neurotic bureaucrats surrounding me, I decided, okay, that's enough. I'm going to do something different.
Sorry, what were you doing at that time?
I worked in industry, AFCO, GE, Bendix, doing engineering. And then I worked for the government, first for the Air Force Avionics Lab at Wright-Patterson, and later at the Coast Guard headquarters in Washington, D.C. And I realized pretty quick that those environments are highly bureaucratized. And by bureaucracy, I refer to the systematic elimination, destruction, and avoidance of corrective feedback. So I didn't want to go on doing that. And I happened to have some friend tell me, because my life wasn't working, that I might benefit by therapy. And I was very skeptical. I thought therapy was for the sick, and I thought it was probably a scam. But then the same friend who said I might benefit from it said, well, I used to stutter or stammer all my life. And I spent 2 hours with a good therapist, and I don't stutter anymore. It's gone. And I was really impressed by that. I thought, oh my gosh, there must be something to it. So I went and got into therapy, and within 2 months, I realized I had to become a therapist because it was that good. And my experience was, once I had some training and began working in that field, I realized every day I get to see people's lives improve. And I never had that experience as a physicist. Never. So it became a very valuable experience. And ever since then, I've continued to do therapeutic work with people, one-on-one, and in families, couples, and small groups. And now I've translated that into working with businesses and other forms of organization. And the transitions came in stages. First, I had some clients, some therapy clients, who owned businesses. And I realized that in working with them, if I was going to be effective, I had to understand business. So I studied business. I knew from very early on that schools, while they might launch an education, schooling does not comprise an education. I have been a student all my life. I am now 77, going on 78 years old, and I'm still a student. I don't attend schools, but I work at learning all the time. Everyone I meet is a source of interesting new information. So doing therapeutic work and helping people to become more aware led me to a lot of other logical consequences. And in 1984, I met John David Garcia. He was a native-born Mexican who came to the United States and started a business in San Francisco, a computer business. And he was doing very well at it. The business was worth probably $100 million at the point where one day he said, I'm just making money. What use is that? That's not especially interesting or exciting, or that's not a legacy. So he walked away from that business. And he moved from San Francisco to Oregon, where he bought a ranch and began doing research on creativity and ethics. Now, when I met him in 1984, until I had met him, I thought the subject of ethics was trivial. Because, as everyone knows, you can pick any ethic you like to live your life. What I didn't know, and quickly learned, is that not all ethics are trivial, that some of them actually work and others don't. So we have valid ethics and invalid ethics. And I learned to tell the difference. A valid ethic is one where, when you are seeking to increase a particular resource that you value, you have a behavior dictated by the ethic that tells you this is how to behave to get what it is you value. And some of those belief systems work and others do not. And the ethics that don't work are not valid. And so I learned from that there are some ethics that really work, but you have to pick the right kind of value. Let's say you want to see a life of peace, prosperity, and freedom. Well, these are valuable assets, valuable resources, but they don't work if you make them the objective of your lifestyle. What does work is maximizing objective truth, in the scientific sense of the word, objective truth, awareness, love, and creativity. So I usually talk about ethics in terms of creativity because in some ways it's the most obvious. Everything that you love about life comes out of some form of creativity, either in the recent past or the distant past. If you love it, you can bet someone created it. And so maximizing creativity in groups became a field of research for John David and I and a few other people. And so we experimented. It was an experimental approach to maximizing creativity in groups. Did I answer your question?
Yes. Yes, I think you did. Thank you. And this is what you do right now. You teach groups about. All right. How do you think your background in physics has influenced your experience as a psychotherapist and as a social kind of communicator and organizer? Because the reason I ask that question is that there's a lot of the therapists that I've sort of met and worked with. There seems to be a kind of mysticism in their approach, right? And it doesn't mean that they won't be effective at some degree, but that approach to science is curious and interesting.
That's a great question. I really love it. Well, the scientific experience I had taught me the scientific method. And science exists for only one singular purpose, and that is to distinguish between true information and false information. And in fact, the way you distinguish between these two kinds of information, in a way, defines science. If information is true, and I believe it is true, that belief increases my intelligence. And by intelligence, I mean my ability to predict and control events in the real world. For instance, I believe that if I dropped this microphone, it would fall on the floor. Gravity works everywhere. And nothing I say or think or believe is going to change that. It's the reality of the way the world works. Physics. Newton knew that. Well, if I believed that letting go of the microphone would cause it to jump up and hit the ceiling, I wouldn't be able to predict what actually happens. So, cause and effect and the scientific method became ingrained in my awareness very early, thanks to my parents, especially my father. And I built on that. And when I became, or decided I wanted to become, a therapist, I realized I want to use methods that really work. And I met a lot of therapists. I was in therapy for 10 years, which I really needed, and it transformed my life in a lot of beneficial ways. But along the way, I met quite a few therapists whom I did not respect. They were not very effective, and as you pointed out, they were pretty mystical in their approach. Cause and effect, scientific method. I discarded the methods that didn't work and adopted the methods that did. I only had to have 2 months or so of therapy to realize it was a really good thing, and by the 3rd month, I realized that's what I wanted to do. And I've enjoyed it because I get to see people's lives improve right before my eyes, day by day, hour by hour. I get to watch that happen, and I know that I made it possible for those people. So I enjoy that, and I never had that doing physics. But cause and effect is really important. And when it comes to therapy, the most creative and effective means of doing therapy were not created in an academic environment. And so the people who are academic therapists, who learn their skills in schools, are generally way less effective than the ones who attend training seminars outside of the school environment. Well, the discernment of that was very important to me. If I had gone to school to become a therapist, I would not have become nearly as good a therapist because I'd be using methods that were not nearly as effective as the ones that I trained in. Back then, I'm talking about 1973, 74, back then, if you wanted to learn the skills of therapy, you had only to show up at a training workshop, pay your fee, and you're a part of the training. These days, you have to qualify for those trainings by having certain kinds of pieces of paper, degrees, etc. And I came to realize that that whole field is highly controlled by cartels. A cartel, of course, is just a shared monopoly by a group of people who contract with governments to enforce their rules. And the government gets something out of it, and the cartel gets something out of it, and the public is not well served by it. I actually have come to regard cartels as evil things. So the scientific method made it possible for me to discern the difference between good therapies and bad therapies. That doesn't mean I've evaluated all the therapies out there. I've evaluated quite a few. I've adopted 6 of them myself as the tools that I use. And unlike most of the people who use each of these 6 different disciplines, I combine them. At any given moment, I can be using 2 or 3 of them at the same time. It makes me more effective. But the techniques were not developed in an academic environment. I don't have much respect for academic therapists. Some of them go on to training programs and get really good. But a lot of them just come out of school and think that they're therapists. And they're not that good. So I distinguish myself from them.
Do you mind sharing a little bit about the 6 approaches that you've identified as true?
Glad to do it. Well, the least effective is cognitive therapy. which some people just call talk therapy. And I did question, before I discovered the merits of therapy, I did question whether talk therapy could actually have any positive effect. And it turns out it does. If it's done well, there is what I call a trickle-down effect, because talk therapy happens up at the conscious level of the mind, and some of what you learn trickles down into the subconscious. That's where the real changes happen. In your day-to-day life, as in mine, we make decisions on the subconscious level. We're faced with a circumstance in our lives, and we make a decision how to respond to it. We make that decision at a very deep unconscious level. Then we rationalize the decision, which is to say we think of reasons why we made that decision, which usually have very little to do with the real reasons. The real reasons can be discerned when you establish communication directly with the subconscious, whether it's someone else's subconscious or your own. You can learn to hold conversations with your own subconscious, and you'll learn a great deal by that, and you can negotiate changes in the way your subconscious reacts to the circumstances of your life. So, going from that position, I learned Gestalt therapy, which was invented by Fritz Perls, and I learned Gestalt from one of his students. And then there was bioenergetic therapy, invented by Alexander Lowen. It's a body-oriented therapy, and I learned that from a couple of Alexander Lowen's students, because he was the one that invented it. And I attended quite a few trainings by trainees of his. Never got to meet the man himself. And then there was strategic therapy by Jay Haley, and I actually learned that by reading a book about it that Jay Haley had written. One nice thing about having the kind of education I had is I don't count on teachers to teach me. I can learn. I can pick up a book, learn, read about how to do something, and then go and do it. Anyone can do this once they have the confidence that they're capable of doing it. I see the role of an ethical teacher is to imbue that particular awareness in the student. You can go out and learn anything you want. I don't care whether it's how to run a business or how to do brain surgery or anything else. If you want to learn to do it, you can do it. And if it's a highly technical skill, you can meet other people who have already learned it and can teach you how. So I've done that a lot, and that's how I learned some of the therapies that I use. So cognitive, bioenergetics, Gestalt, and strategic, and then there are two more, and that is neuro-linguistic programming that was invented by John Grinder and Richard Bandler. I actually trained for 6 months with John Grinder. After having used his techniques for a year, I attended a training of his, and that's basically just a way of communicating directly with the subconscious mind. If you can communicate directly with someone's subconscious mind, you can have profoundly more influence on them than you can if you're just communicating at the conscious level. And then Ericksonian hypnosis. Milton Erickson invented modern hypnosis, and after I had been using that for a couple of years, I did a training with one of Erickson's disciples, you might say, one of his better students, Jeff Zeig. And so I then had 6 different techniques, which I then combined. And I've not gone on to learn other techniques, though I'm aware there are some. There's one that involves tapping on different parts of the body. There's one that involves rapid eye movements, rapid eye movement desensitization. I've experimented with those, and I know people that use them. I don't use them because I don't think they're as effective as the ones that I use. But I would have learned little of this stuff had I gone to school to learn to be a therapist. Because most of these the therapists who learn therapy in schools, the academic therapists, they are scornful of these things. I actually have had someone say to me, "Oh, you do alternative therapy," kind of sneering down their nose at me. Well, to me, doing an alternative therapy is not an insult, it's a compliment, because it's out on the fringes of this industry that the really creative work takes place.
Yeah, this is something that not a lot of people know about me, but I wanted to be a psychotherapist for years, and I studied psychology independently as well, and I studied philosophy, and I studied economics, and then at some point, maybe 2 years ago, I decided that I wanted to shift to technology. So I shifted to Bitcoin. I started doing all the Bitcoin stuff that I've done, and so I feel like I can relate to sort of your finding of psychology, because I started philosophy and all this stuff, and yeah, it's very interesting to hear the ones that you've identified. I think that is, in general, in my experience, those are the ones that are the best, for what that's worth. Let's talk about philosophy a little bit, and especially about ethics, because that seems to be the operating system of the mind, right? How we look at social relationships is really very much how we act upon them and relate to ourselves. The way that I've kind of looked at ethics for a long time has been not really from a value-based approach, but rather from a kind of principled sort of approach, right? So honesty is the highest value. You cannot have truth if you are not yourself honest with yourself, and then with others if you choose to, if it's worth it to you. Humility has been kind of an essential value as well, which is being open to corrective feedback, right? And that fits right into your definition. And then curiosity. And curiosity is it's sort of a virtue in some ways, but it's also kind of like an instinct. So it's kind of a tricky thing.
I'm glad you brought up curiosity. In my bio on the internet, I point out that my life has been driven by curiosity since I was very little. In fact, when I was quite small, I don't remember exactly what age, I think I was about 6 maybe or 7, I disassembled my parents' alarm clock because I wanted to know, how does it work? They weren't totally happy with my doing that because I didn't have a clue how to put it back together. But I did mention to disassemble it because I was curious. I wanted to see the inside. Oh, it's ticking. What do you know? Must be something in there. Took it apart with a screwdriver and a hammer. But curiosity just means asking questions. And this is why one of the rules of ethics that I really appreciate is that certainty is unethical. Because when you're certain about something, you close your mind to new information. Whereas that new information could be very valuable. It's important to keep your mind open, to ask questions that lead to new information, some of which is very valuable, true information. So curiosity is the core phenomenon of good education. When children learn to be curious, and they're in an environment that stimulates their curiosity, and they have access to information that will answer the questions that they raise because of their curiosity, now you've got real education. And once they reach that stage, they don't need teachers. You don't need someone spoon-feeding you information. It might be convenient at times. It may be a shortcut. But if you're asking the right questions and looking for the answers, you can find them. And the internet, of course, has made that much easier than it used to be.
Yeah. Okay. Now, yeah, curiosity is fascinating.
I would say it's fascination.
It's fascination itself, and it is kind of like a horse that you get on, and it just takes you. You kind of let it guide you to some degree. I found interesting your differentiation between values and virtues. My understanding so far is that values are sort of what you identify as the ends, the goals, the sort of what you want to achieve, and virtues are the means by which you achieve them. But what is your take on that?
I know that many ethicists use the concept of virtues as a core concept in talking about ethics. I don't. I could. I like to use words that people more easily understand. And if you talk to someone about being virtuous, there aren't many people who know what that means without some explanation. But if I say that an ethic is composed of two parts, and one of them is a value, that is a description of what you want more of, it's really hard to misunderstand that. The other part to every ethic is a belief or belief system that tells you how to act to get more of what it is you want, of what you value. That's the part you refer to as virtue. Virtue is acting well within a good belief system or something like that. I don't use the word virtue, so I don't really have a good working definition for it in my vocabulary. But I do understand having a belief system. So if for example, if my value, the thing I want more of, is peace in the world, and I believe that I can achieve that by prayer, okay, well, does that work? Some people say it does. I don't think so, because we've had millions of people for thousands of years praying for peace. I don't think we have more peace now than we had 8,000 years ago when government was invented. So I don't trust that. I think that ethic, and it is an ethic, I think it's invalid. And this is how you tell a good ethic from a bad ethic, that if you follow the belief system, do you actually get more of what you value? Or do you get something neutral? Or, worse still, you get the opposite. Take, for example, the Soviet Union. It operated on an ethic, and the value sought was material well-being for everyone. The belief system was that they could achieve that with what we now know as a tyrannical communist regime. Did they get material well-being for everyone? No. They got almost universal poverty. Well, that ethic was obviously not valid. In the United States, the founders of the United States wanted to create freedom. Well, not for everyone. It was for white male property owners. But they had a belief system that they could create ample freedom based on a governmental system that was a republic based on majority rule. Well, except for 2 years, 1865 when the slaves were freed, and 1920 when women finally got to vote, all the other years since the founding of the country, there's been less freedom each year than the year before. That ethic wasn't valid. Nope, didn't work. So I look for ethics that are valid. And I've only found a few of them so far, and those few are logically equivalent to each other. If I maximize or seek to maximize objective truth, in the scientific sense of the word, or awareness, or love, or creativity, I can build a valid ethic on those values. I can't build a valid ethic on happiness. I can't build a valid ethic on wealth. I can't build a valid ethic on prosperity or freedom. These don't work. I can't tell you why they don't work, but historically we see they don't work. But if I seek to increase truth, awareness, love, and creativity, I incidentally get more happiness, more peace, more love. I get more freedom and prosperity incidentally as a byproduct by seeking truth, awareness, love, and creativity. And when any one of those is increased, they all increase. And when any one of those is diminished or limited, they're all limited or diminished. So they're logically equivalent to one another.
How do you define love? Big question.
We don't have time today to get
No,
a
that's a great one.
comprehensive answer to that. I can say a few little things about it. You can think of real love. I mean, there are many feelings that pass for love. In other words, someone feels sexually attracted to someone else and they say, "Oh, I love you." No. I'm drawn to you. I'm attracted to you. I want to have sex with you. All of that's real, but love takes a little longer. It goes a little deeper than any of those things. Love has to do with when you have a very genuine, deep regard for someone else's life, and you're willing to even make sacrifices to increase that other person's creativity, awareness, and access to truth. When you have that kind of commitment, that's love. And the love is in the commitment to that outcome, not in the emotional feeling or the physical feeling that you experience in the other person's presence. So I think I have a pretty good idea about what love is experientially. I married 4 times. In the first 3, I didn't have a clue what it meant to really love. I wish I had, but I didn't. And then I met the woman who became my 4th wife, and we decided early on in our friendship that we would always be truthful to each other and always be forthcoming about our thoughts and feelings toward one another. And we built on that. And we fought like cats and dogs for a few years. But we had a commitment to work through that. And through that commitment, we learned what we needed to learn so that the fighting disappeared. We learned to fight for closeness instead of fighting to win. And then we were together for 38 years. And I took care of her when she was dying of Alzheimer's. That was an act of love. Caring for someone with Alzheimer's, especially someone you really care about, is very stressful. But I felt honored to do it. I had gotten so much from her. She taught me love. And from this I learned that the only way to really learn love is to be loved, to receive love when you're young. People who do not receive enough love when they're really little never really learn love. Okay? I had just barely enough love when I was little that I finally was able to open myself to the experience of learning love experientially. And I wish those of you out there listening to this and watching this video, I wish you love. I wish you to have the kind of experience I had where sooner or later you really get it. That it ain't just about excitement and attraction. It's about a very deep, permanent, lasting commitment to the other person's well-being. And most people can learn this. There are exceptions. There are people who cannot learn it and never will. And I feel sorry for those people, and I tend to avoid them because some of them are really dangerous.
Appreciate that definition. That's probably one of the best definitions I've ever heard to that question. It's a very, very difficult question. Yeah. So you'll be able to find all his work on the website. We'll pull the links below. And you teach a lot of interesting things. I've had the opportunity to listen to you a little bit, and it's fascinating. And yeah, and the reason I heard about you was you have a model for organizational strategy, I suppose, that it's very interesting. Do you want to maybe mention a few of the ideas there so people know?
Sure. In 1984, I met the most brilliant person I've ever known. And I have known some really brilliant people, including Nobel Prize winners in physics. I met John David Garcia. And he taught me the ethics. And I participated for 17 years in research that he was doing, right up until the time he died in 2001. Research about ethics, law, government, and organizational development based on those findings. And I'll just give you a very, very brief capsule view of what we learned through that research. We learned that big groups have a very hard time making ethical decisions. An act is ethical if it increases love, awareness, truth, or creativity for at least one person without limiting or diminishing it for anyone. That's a simple definition. Well, you take that definition and turn the crank of logic, and out come a whole set of principles that you can use day by day in your relationships and organizations as you live your life, day by day. So we went further than that. We wanted to know what's the best way to have a group maximize its creativity. Turned out it's very important for the group to be committed to an ethical purpose. I just gave you a definition of an ethical act, and based on that you can define an ethical purpose. So you have a group has an ethical purpose. What's the best size for the group? If the group is too big, it's very difficult to make ethical decisions. And I see this as the biggest problem humanity faces today, is that our institutions consistently make unethical decisions, decisions that are destructive instead of creative. So we did research. We tried different sizes of groups, 2 people, 3 people, 4 people, up to about 20. And we found that the creativity of the group was maximized with 8 people. So I call a group of 8 people that understand these principles an octologue, like a dialogue, only for 8. Okay, well, basically, you have to have an ethical purpose, you have to make ethical decisions, you have to understand the ethics in the group, and you have to have decisions that are unanimous, and one can learn to make unanimous decisions in a small group, not so easily in a big group. So small groups, ethical decisions, unanimous decisions, and important factor is feedback. We give each other feedback, and the hard part of learning that is just learning to accept feedback from other people without becoming defensive. And we have a whole bunch of techniques for doing that. So I'm giving workshops, teaching people how to do these things, to create first octologues, these little groups, and then combining octologues to form big groups called holomats. And a big group can be of any size. You could have 1 billion people in a single holomat, and they're all committed to some ethical purposes, and they're committed to working together under an ethical contract. So we know now how to do all these things, and this is what we teach.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Is there anything else you'd like to mention before we go?
Sure. The website, I know it's displayed below. It's titanians.org. And my email, if you want to email me, is Cronus, C-R-O-N-U-S, Cronus at titanians.org. And I welcome inquiries. I usually manage to respond to them pretty promptly. And if you have questions about how to apply these principles in your organization, any kind of organization that's ethical, I'll be happy to help you out with that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Dashes, I think, is a very promising technology. And it is kind of, because of the system, it's kind of like a living organism, right? Bitcoin right now is funded by major companies, right? BitPay, Coinbase, Blockstream. They're funded by companies that have a particular intention and will. They want Bitcoin to be something, right? But Dash is internally funded. Dash is dependent on the value of its unit, right? The more valuable that Dash is, the more money that there is for this organism to keep developing and adapting and growing. And that is a very new thing in the world. I honestly believe this is a cybernetic organism. We humans, and we mortal humans in the Dash community are basically helping the gears that move it, but we can fall away and this thing will continue.